There's a particular kind of cold in Wyoming that doesn't just settle on your skin. It burrows down to the bone, nestling in the places you keep your secrets. Maggie Whitaker felt it the moment she stepped from her battered pickup truck into the howling wind outside Cheyenne's old livestock barn.
Just like your mama.
She braced herself, drawing her coat tight, boots crunching on crusted snow as she made her way past rows of tired trucks and old-timers huddled over styrofoam cups of coffee. Inside, the air reeked of hay, sweat, and anticipation. Ranchers and traders packed the rickety bleachers, voices low and watchful, sizing up each other and every beast paraded through the ring. Maggie caught a few glances, a nod here, a frown there. She was known here, if only as a cautionary tale. The Whitaker woman, widow of Tom, left with a fading ranch and too many ghosts. She kept to herself these days, rarely seen except when business forced her hand. Folks respected her stubbornness, sure, but respect and warmth weren't the same thing. The auctioneer's rapid-fire chant cut through the barn. Cattle, sheep, a fine-looking paint gelding all drew strong bids. Maggie sat silent, jaw set, hands buried in the folds of her threadbare gloves. She wasn't here for any of them. She waited, heart thumping a slow, stubborn beat. Then, as if the universe itself was testing her patience, they brought out the last lot. A scrawny bay gelding, ribs sharp under patchy fur, head hung low as if he already knew what the crowd thought. Duke, the handler called him, not even bothering to dress up the sales pitch. Years on the range, now good for nothing but dog food. One eye swollen nearly shut, a limp in his step. Just looking at him, you could almost hear the barn sigh. Someone laughed, loud and mean. Well, if that ain't the saddest sack of bones I ever saw. A few others joined in, elbows nudging, voices ringing with that special cruelty reserved for the hopeless. The bidding started low, so low that nobody bothered to raise a hand. The silence was uncomfortable. Even the auctioneer stumbled over his patter, voice trailing off, eyes scanning the crowd for pity or a sucker. Come on now, folks. Surely someone's got use for a horse like this, maybe for target practice. That's when Maggie stood up. Her voice carried, calm but clear. $50, she said. Heads turned. There was a rustle, a flicker of disbelief. Someone in the back muttered, "She's lost it, hasn't she?" Another barked, "Maggie, that thing's more broken than your luck." The auctioneer tried to regain control. "We got 50, do I hear 60? No? 50 going once, twice, sold to the lady in the blue coat." A few snickers rippled through the crowd, then outright laughter. Maggie ignored them, stepping down into the sawdust ring as the handler thrust Duke's worn lead rope into her hand. Duke wouldn't meet her gaze. He flinched from her touch, muscles taut, eyes rolling white. Maggie spoke to him quietly, feeling the weight of every watching eye. She led him forward, step by painful step. The laughter faded to whispers, then silence, as if everyone was waiting for some disaster to cap off this little show. Halfway to the barn doors, it happened. Duke stumbled, legs trembling, sides heaving. He dropped to his knees, and for a moment time froze. The horse collapsed fully, body shaking in the sawdust, groaning softly. Gasps echoed around the barn. Maggie knelt beside him, hands gentle on his neck. "It's all right now, boy. You're not done yet," she murmured. But the crowd was already murmuring. "Foolish widow," one voice called. "She can't save herself, let alone that horse." The auctioneer glanced away, embarrassment ridden plain as daylight. Two handlers rushed to help, but Maggie waved them off. She stayed kneeling in the dirt beside the broken horse, as if daring anyone to move her. Outside, the wind rattled the loose barn siding, cold and sharp. Inside, the weight of every stare pressed on Maggie's shoulders. She met their eyes, one by one, letting the silence grow thick and heavy. Finally, the barn manager barked, Get them out of here before the old gal tries mouth to mouth. Maggie rose, slow and deliberate, refusing to let her hands shake. She whispered to Duke, "Easy now, we'll get you home." With a mighty effort, Duke lurched to his feet, nearly toppling Maggie in the process. For a heartbeat, he stood taller, almost proud, before his head dropped again. The laughter returned, meaner this time, tinged with pity and contempt. "She'll never learn. That horse won't last the week." Maggie kept walking, step after stubborn step, out into the Wyoming winter with the battered bay trailing behind. She heard every word, every snicker, but she kept her chin up, eyes fixed ahead. If her neighbors wanted to call her foolish, let them. She'd been called worse by life itself. The icy wind cut across the parking lot as she loaded Duke into her ancient trailer. She paused, hand on his mane, feeling the tremble in his frame. For a moment, she almost doubted herself. Almost. But then she saw the way Duke looked at her, one ear flicking, a spark of something alive and fierce in his battered eyes. "You and me, old boy," she said, her voice barely a whisper lost to the wind. "We know what it means to be overlooked, don't we?" The trailer door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing across the empty lot. And in that cold Wyoming dusk, Maggie Whitaker, the foolish widow, the outcast, drove home, dragging the ghost of her reputation and a broken horse behind her, daring the world to laugh a little louder. The sky above Willow Ranch was a low, swollen gray, hinting at trouble before dawn even cracked the horizon. Maggie barely slept after bringing Duke home. All night, the battered gelding groaned and shifted in his makeshift stall, every breath a reminder of the gamble she'd made. Maggie sat with him, shivering under a wool blanket, one hand stroking his trembling neck. "You made it through the night, old boy. That's something." Outside, the ranch stirred to life. Chickens fussed, dogs barked, cattle lowed from the frozen fields. The hands, grumbling about the weather and Maggie's purchase, made no effort to hide their skepticism as she led Duke, slow and careful, into a small paddock near the barn. "Keep him off the main range," one muttered. "Wouldn't want the other animals catching whatever's wrong with them." Maggie ignored them. She had more pressing worries. Willow Ranch was barely scraping by since Tom died. Deaths, repairs, endless bills. Even her granddaughter, Grace, 17, barely spoke to her these days. Grace was a whirlwind of slamming doors and muttered complaints, anger simmering just under her skin since her father's accident. Now, as Maggie checked Duke's water and feed, Grace emerged from the house, hands jammed in her coat pockets. Her eyes, blue as the winter sky, flickered from her grandmother to the pitiful horse in the paddock. "That's the one everyone laughed about at auction." "Looks even worse up close," Grace said, voice flat. "He's got more fight in him than you think," Maggie replied, not turning. Grace snorted. "Maybe you both do." The day moved in fits and starts. Chores, complaints, the whine of a stubborn tractor. By afternoon, the wind picked up, howling down from the foothills, snow beginning to swirl and sting. Maggie felt it, a storm rolling in. She hurried through her rounds, making sure the barns were latched and the youngest calves brought close. Suddenly, a shout rang out, "Stampede!" Maggie's heart seized. She sprinted to the north fence, boots sliding in the new snow. There, cattle, nearly 50 head, wild-eyed and terrified, were tearing across the far pasture. Beyond them, thunder cracked, lightning forking across the sky. The herd bunched, panicked, their path aimed directly at the old ravine, a deadly drop they'd never survive. "Get the horses!" one ranch hand yelled. Another, "We'll never turn them in this weather." Grace, still by the paddock, froze in horror as she saw the chaos unfolding. "Grandma, what do we do?" Maggie's mind raced. The ranch horses were already bolting in panic. Only Duke, rail-thin and ragged, stood quiet, watching the stampede. Maggie's instincts screamed this was madness. But she looked at Duke and saw something in his stance, a tension, a focus. She flung open the paddock gate, grabbing a frayed lead. "Come on, boy," she breathed, desperate. Somewhere in Duke, some memory of purpose sparked to life. He surged forward, surprising Maggie with his strength, and she vaulted onto his back, bareback and wild, like a girl again. The wind stung her eyes, sleet whipping her face, as she steered Duke straight at the charging herd. "Stop, Maggie!" someone cried. But she didn't stop. She trusted Duke, praying he had one run left. The herd was a wall of terror and muscle, but Duke did not hesitate. He plunged into their midst, snapping and pawing, head low, pushing at the lead cow. Maggie shouted, voice lost in the wind. Duke pivoted, shouldering his way through the panicked beasts, driving them away from the ravine. For a moment, Maggie thought they might make it. Then, a flash of red. A calf broke from the herd, racing straight for the edge. Without warning, Grace dashed from the fence, chasing the runaway calf. "Grace, no!" Maggie screamed. Grace stumbled, mud flying, catching the calf's halter just as her feet slid dangerously close to the edge. The herd's momentum bore down, hooves thundering, mud spraying. Maggie's heart stopped, her granddaughter frozen, wide-eyed, the cattle seconds away from disaster. Then Duke moved. With impossible speed, he tore free from the herd and lunged toward Grace. Maggie gripped his mane as he leapt the shallow ditch, cutting off the stampede's path, forcing the cattle to veer away. The world slowed. Duke, chest heaving, stood firm between Grace and the herd. Cattle streamed around him, missing her by inches. Maggie slid from his back, boots slipping, and pulled Grace into her arms. "You're safe now. It's over." For a long minute, there was only the sound of breathing. Duke's labored, Maggie's shaking, Grace's hiccuping sobs. The ranch hands stared, awestruck. That horse, he saved her. Never seen anything like it. Duke, trembling, lowered his head to Grace, who reached out a shaky hand, tears frozen on her cheeks. "Thank you. I'm sorry I doubted you." Maggie held them both, the battered horse and the trembling girl, as the snow swirled and the ranchers gathered close. The whispers of scorn faded, replaced by stunned respect. That night, word spread across the county. The foolish widow's horse, her cast-off, her risk, had saved a life. And Willow Ranch, for the first time in years, felt a spark of hope in the winter storm. For the first time in months, Willow Ranch woke to something like peace. The storm passed overnight, leaving behind a world frosted in white and the kind of silence that only comes after chaos. Maggie, exhausted but strangely hopeful, watched the sunrise through her kitchen window, coffee cooling in her hands. It had been a night to remember, a night when a broken horse had done the impossible. Duke, though sore and clearly exhausted from his heroics, stood in his small paddock, ears pricked, tail flicking at the chill. He looked different somehow, not just battered, but proud. Maggie saw it, and she wondered if maybe she was different too. She put on her boots and coat and stepped outside, her breath puffing in the morning air. Grace was already there, perched on the fence, wrapped in her father's old flannel jacket, watching Duke with a quiet intensity. The wind tugged at her hair, but she didn't seem to notice. "He's eating," Grace said softly as Maggie joined her, nodding toward the bay's feeder. "Looks like he's got an appetite after all," Maggie replied, voice gentle. For a while, they just watched. The world felt fragile, like one loud noise could shatter it all over again. But Duke, once the object of ridicule, moved with a new steadiness, his limp a little less pronounced, his eye brighter. Grace hopped down from the fence and crossed to Duke's side. She knelt, palm open, and waited. The horse regarded her warily, then, slowly, nuzzled her hand. Grace's eyes filled, but she blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. "I think he remembers what it's like to be cared for," she whispered. Maggie put a hand on her granddaughter, a gesture that was both an apology and a truce. The following days settled into a gentle rhythm. Grace insisted on helping with Duke's care, brushing out his tangled mane, picking mud from his hooves, mixing oats and molasses to coax him to eat more. She talked to him in a low voice, telling him secrets she kept from everyone else. "I know what it's like to lose someone," Grace murmured one afternoon, kneeling beside Duke as she bandaged a cut on his foreleg. "It's like everything's just different all the time, like you can't trust the ground not to give way under your feet." Duke listened, eyes half closed, and Maggie, working nearby, found herself blinking away a sting of emotion. She saw something changing in Grace, a softening, a willingness to let the world in again. In the quiet hours after chores, Maggie and Grace shared coffee and cocoa at the kitchen table, their conversations shifting from tense to tentative. Grace asked about the ranch, about the days before her father's accident, about her grandfather Tom. "Was he always so stubborn?" Grace asked one evening, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Maggie chuckled, the sound rusty but real. "Stubborn doesn't even cover it. Your granddad could make a mule seem reasonable. He believed this ranch was meant for more than just cattle and fences. He wanted it to be a place people remembered, even if just for a good story." Grace leaned forward, curiosity lighting her face. "Do you miss him?" Maggie looked away, out into the deepening dusk. "Every day. But sometimes I think he's still here, watching us, figuring things out, probably laughing at all the mistakes we make." There were moments of laughter, rare, precious moments, when the weight lifted and something like hope seeped in. Grace found an old guitar in the attic and strummed clumsy chords on the porch. Maggie read stories from worn paperback novels aloud at night, her voice steady as a metronome, Grace listening with her eyes closed, Duke's soft knickers drifting in from the paddock. Slowly, the ranch hands warmed up too. They'd watched Duke save Grace with their own eyes, and while old prejudices died hard, there was less whispering now, more respect. One evening, Tomas, the oldest hand, left a new blanket draped over Duke's stall. "Even a stubborn horse deserves a warm night," he said, avoiding Maggie's grateful look. Days passed, and the land thawed. The cattle returned to the high pasture. The fences were mended, and the usual grind of ranch life took over. Yet in the pockets of stillness, Maggie found herself reflecting. On Tom, on loss, on the quiet way life sometimes gives you a second chance, wrapped in barbed wire and pain. She told Grace stories about the way Tom would whistle every morning, the silly names he gave the calves, the summer nights they'd all sit out by the fire and listen to coyotes sing. Grace listened, chin propped in her hands, questions spilling out. "Did Dad love this place? Why did you stay after Grandpa died?" Maggie answered as honestly as she could. "I stayed because someone had to, because I couldn't stand the thought of letting it all disappear. Your father loved it too. He carried a lot of weight, same as me. I think that's why he was always trying to fix everything, even things that couldn't be fixed." Some evenings, Maggie walked the fence lines alone, feeling the land's pulse under her boots. The pain of Tom's loss remained, a dull ache, but now it was joined by a flicker of gratitude. For Duke, for Grace, for this impossible, beautiful mess of a ranch. And always, in the center of it all, was Duke, scarred but healing, just like the people who'd taken him in. Sometimes, Maggie would find Grace sitting beside his stall, voice barely above a whisper, telling him about dreams she'd once had and the new ones she was just starting to imagine. In the quiet, between the storms, the Whitaker women and their battered horse learned to trust each other again. And though the shadows of grief and doubt still lingered at the edges of every sunrise, Willow Ranch felt, for the first time in a long time, like home. Early spring settled quietly over Willow Ranch, carrying a gentler warmth that thawed even the hardest patches of old Wyoming ice. Buds nudged up from the dark earth. The cattle seemed calmer, and the days, for the first time in years, followed a softer rhythm. Maggie noticed her granddaughter humming while she worked, and Duke's coat began to gleam under Grace's careful brushing. There were even moments when Maggie caught herself smiling, unguarded. But peace is a fragile thing, and sometimes the past finds its way back, no matter how well you've hidden from it. It happened on a Tuesday. Maggie was in the barn, oiling saddle leather and listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch waking up, when she heard tires crunch on the long gravel drive. She glanced out the window, expecting a delivery or maybe one of the hands coming in early. Instead, a battered, cream-colored sedan rolled to a stop by the fence. The engine coughed, then died. For a moment, nobody got out. Maggie stepped outside, curiosity and caution twined together in her chest. The wind tugged at her hair, scattering the smell of dust and budding grass. The driver's door creaked open, and out stepped an elderly woman, straight back but moving with the slow care of someone who'd fought too many winters. She wore a dark skirt, a faded green coat, and a neat felt hat, out of place in this rough country as a Sunday hymn at a Saturday night poker game. The stranger approached, her cane tapping softly, gaze fixed on the barn. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Maggie called, wary but polite. The woman looked up, her eyes sharp beneath wisps of silver hair. "I'm looking for a horse," she said. "His name is Duke. I heard he came here after the auction last month." Maggie's breath caught. Word traveled fast in these parts, but few outsiders ever came searching for a single broken-down horse. She studied the stranger for a moment, then nodded. "He's here, all right. You know him?" The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "I did once. My name is Mrs. Harper, Elizabeth Harper." The name struck something in Maggie, distant, half forgotten, but ringing a bell deep inside her memory. She led Mrs. Harper to Duke's stall, where the bay gelding stood with his head over the door, watching them both with wary intelligence. Mrs. Harper stopped short, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth. "Oh, Duke." Her voice cracked. She moved closer, and Duke's ears flicked forward, a shiver running through his body. Grace, who had come to check on the horses, hung back, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Mrs. Harper reached into her coat and pulled out a worn black-and-white photograph. She held it out to Maggie. The image showed a younger Duke, robust and glossy, standing tall beside a much younger Maggie and her late husband, Tom. There was another man in the photo, one Maggie recognized instantly. Jack Harper, Elizabeth's son. Maggie's heart thudded. Memories came flooding back. Summer barbecues, horse shows, the rivalries and friendships that shaped the valley for decades. Mrs. Harper's voice shook. "Duke belonged to my family's ranch, Harper Hill, until about 3 years ago. He was Jack's pride and joy, trained for work and competition. After the accident, well, things fell apart." Maggie stiffened. The accident. Even after all these years, the words chilled her. Grace stepped closer, brow furrowed. "What accident?" The barn seemed to tighten around them. Maggie hesitated, old pain creeping in. "It was the day your grandfather died, Grace," she said quietly. "He was helping Jack with a roundup. There was a storm. Horses got spooked." Mrs. Harper's hands shook as she clutched the photo. "My son, he blamed himself for Tom's death, said it was Duke's fault for bolting. After that, Jack couldn't stand to keep the horse. He sold Duke, and Duke bounced around until he ended up at that auction, broken." Grace's eyes burned. "So Duke was there the day Grandpa died?" She looked at Maggie, hurt and confusion twisting her features. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Maggie swallowed hard, a lifetime of guilt pressing down on her shoulders. I wanted to protect you. I wanted to forget that day myself. Mrs. Harper's voice, thin but firm, cut through the tension. We can't run from the truth. Jack lost himself after Tom died. He left the valley, left me, left everything. I came here today because I heard Duke had found a home. I needed to know he was all right, and maybe that there could be some forgiveness. Grace stared at the floor, fists balled at her sides. So all this time, we've been taking care of the horse that... She broke off, turning away. Maggie stepped forward, her own pain raw. We can't blame Duke for what happened. Storms come, accidents happen. Your grandfather knew that better than anyone. He loved this ranch. He loved us. Holding on to anger won't change the past. Mrs. Harper touched Grace's shoulder, gentle but unyielding. Sometimes we have to face the shadows, child, or they'll follow us forever. Outside, the sun crept higher, casting long shadows across the pasture. Maggie watched her granddaughter struggle, torn between grief and anger, her young face tight with the weight of old wounds. She wanted to reach out, to promise that it would be all right, but some things had to be faced alone. As Mrs. Harper drove away, Maggie stood beside Grace and Duke, the three of them wrapped in silence. "Do you hate me for not telling you?" Maggie finally whispered. Grace shook her head, wiping her eyes roughly. I need time, Grandma. I need to figure out what all this means." Maggie nodded, fighting back tears of her own. "I'll be here, whenever you're ready." The past, Maggie realized, never truly left. It lingered in photographs, in the scars on a horse's flank, in the unspoken words between generations. But maybe, just maybe, by facing it together, they could find a way through. The ranch, the family, and even Duke all carried scars. But there was still time for healing, if they were brave enough to face the truth. Spring pressed on with new life across Willow Ranch, but Maggie couldn't shake the shadow that Mrs. Harper's visit had cast. The story of Duke's past and his connection to the Whitaker family's worst day hung like fog in the house and barn. Grace grew quieter, her eyes drifting often to the old photograph on the kitchen table. Still, the chores didn't stop. Calves were born, fences mended, hay cut and stacked under the lengthening sun. Life, stubborn and insistent, kept moving. Yet, in the weeks that followed, something in the air shifted. It began with the smallest things: a broken latch on the barn door, a wheelbarrow overturned and left, half the feed spilled in the dirt. At first, Maggie brushed these off as accidents, the kind every ranch collects. But one morning, just as the mist burned off the lower pasture, Tomas came running from the east fence. "Maggie, you need to see this, now!" Maggie and Grace hurried after him, boots thudding across the dew-soaked ground. At the fence line, Maggie's heart dropped. 3 long sections of wire had been slashed, posts loosened at their base. Cattle milled nervously, some nosing at the fresh gap, and one young steer had wandered dangerously close to the road. Tomas shook his head, jaw clenched. This wasn't no coyote or stray. Someone did this on purpose. Before they could catch their breath, trouble grew. Within days, Duke grew sick after a morning's graze. His breathing turned shallow, his coat slicked with sweat, eyes rolling with fear. Grace knelt beside him in the stable, hands trembling as she held a bucket of water to his lips. "Please, please don't give up now." Maggie fetched the vet, her pulse pounding. After a tense hour, the diagnosis came. The water trough had been tainted. Traces of pesticide, enough to sicken any animal who drank. "This wasn't an accident," the vet said quietly, eyeing Maggie. "You need to be careful. Someone's sending a message." The news rattled through the small Wyoming valley like thunder. Whispers spun in the feed store, at church, at the Saturday market. Some folks came to the ranch with casseroles and quiet words of comfort, but others looked at Maggie with wary, sidelong glances. The old rumors resurfaced, about curses, about bad luck following the Whitaker family like a stray dog. Some said Maggie had brought all this trouble on herself, refusing to let the past lie. A week later, Grace found a note shoved under the barn door. The handwriting was shaky, the message plain. Sell the horse, sell the ranch, leave before it gets worse. Maggie read it 3 times before tearing it to pieces. Grace watched her, eyes wide. What do we do now? We do what Whitakers have always done. We stand our ground, Maggie said, her voice steel. Yet even she couldn't hide the worry eating at her gut. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the old house. Was she putting Grace in danger? Was it foolish to fight against a world that seemed determined to break them? But the next morning, as dawn spilled gold across the fields, Maggie saw something she hadn't expected. Grace was already up, moving from stall to stall, checking the locks, testing the water, double-checking every feed bag. She moved with a sense of purpose, her anger burning into something harder, something useful. Duke, still weak but recovering, lifted his head when Grace entered. She knelt by his side, brushing his coat with slow, steady strokes. "I'm not letting them win," she whispered, fierce. "Not after everything we've been through." For the first time, Grace looked at Duke not just as a relic of pain, but as a symbol of survival, of stubbornness, of hope when all the odds were against you. The next days brought more tension. At the general store, Maggie overheard snatches of conversation. "Should have sold years ago. That old Whitaker curse. Heard it was the rival ranch, the Harpers, behind all this." But not everyone turned away. A handful of neighbors started dropping by with kind words, small offers of help, a day fixing fences, a casserole, a little cash slipped into Maggie's palm. "You're not alone, Maggie," Mrs. Garvey said, her hands rough but warm. "This valley's seen hard times before. You'll make it." Still, the suspicion cut deep. One evening, as the sun slipped low, Maggie found Grace sitting on the back porch, staring at the distant hills. "Do you ever think we really are cursed?" Grace asked, voice trembling. Maggie sat beside her, pulling her close. "I don't believe in curses. I believe in hard luck, and bad people, and making the best of the hand you're dealt. This ranch is worth fighting for. So are you. So is that horse." Grace nodded, eyes fierce. "We're not leaving, Grandma. Not ever." Word about Duke's heroics and the troubles at Willow Ranch spread beyond the county. A reporter showed up, snapping photos and scribbling notes as Duke nuzzled Grace's hand. The story, published in the local paper, drew more attention, some supportive, some hostile. The eyes of the valley turned on Willow Ranch, waiting to see if the Whitaker women would stand or fall. Late one night, as rain hammered the tin roof, Maggie found Grace asleep in Duke's stall, one arm draped over the old gelding's neck. Maggie watched them, heart swelling with pride and sorrow, and realized that maybe hope wasn't something you waited for. Maybe it was something you built, stubbornly, one day at a time. Outside, the shadows still gathered, but inside, for the first time in a long while, Willow Ranch glowed with the stubborn, defiant light of survival. Morning came sharp and clear, the air humming with a restless tension that Maggie could feel in her bones. After weeks of threats, sleepless nights, and the stubborn fight to keep Willow Ranch afloat, something in the rhythm of daily life had shifted. The ranch, once scarred by suspicion and sabotage, now pulsed with a steely resolve, a resolve embodied most fiercely by Grace. Grace awoke before dawn, the kind of determined energy she'd only read about in adventure novels burning in her chest. Her old anger felt different now, smoothed and shaped into purpose. She pulled on her boots, tied back her hair, and moved through the silent house, pausing by her grandmother's door to listen for Maggie's even breathing. Out in the barn, the animals stirred in anticipation, Duke among them, his eyes bright and watchful despite the lingering effects of poisoning. Grace had changed. The ranch hands noticed it first. She no longer shrank from their gazes or hurried past their conversations. Instead, she joined them for morning coffee, sleeves rolled, notebook in hand, asking about broken fences, missing feed, and suspicious tire tracks by the north pasture. Her voice was steady, her questions direct. "We can't fix what we don't talk about," she told Tomas one chilly morning, watching the sunrise blaze over the ridge. Under her guidance, the ranch became a fortress. Grace drew up schedules, assigned night watches, double-checked every lock and latch. She walked the fence lines herself, notebook at her hip and a flashlight in her hand, searching for footprints or fresh cuts in the wire. She found evidence. Boot prints too small for any of their hands, a cigarette butt by the west gate, unfamiliar tire marks near the creek. "We need to be careful. Whoever's doing this, they know our routines," she warned, her eyes hard with newfound grit. Grace even approached Maggie one afternoon, her voice hesitant but determined. "Grandma, can we talk about Dad, about what happened? I don't want secrets between us anymore." Maggie, startled by the openness, nodded and put down her work. They sat together on the porch, the smell of spring rain heavy in the air. For the first time, they spoke not just of memories, but of fears and failures. About the accident that had stolen Grace's father, about the guilt Maggie had carried, about how grief can twist even the strongest hearts. "I thought keeping it all inside would protect you," Maggie admitted, voice trembling. "But all it did was make us strangers." Grace squeezed her hand. "I was angry for so long, not at you, just at the world. At Dad for leaving, at myself for not being enough. But I want to let it go. I want us to be a family again." That conversation marked a turning point. A quiet understanding passed between them, a recognition that pain shared was pain lessened. Together, they poured their energy into the ranch, refusing to be cowed by threats or haunted by the past. Then, one evening, as Grace reviewed her notes by the dim kitchen light, she noticed a pattern. Every act of sabotage coincided with deliveries from a single supplier, one tied to Harper Hill, the rival ranch where Duke had come from. The realization hit her hard, connecting all the scattered dots into a single chilling picture. "Grandma, I think I know who's behind this," she said, voice low but urgent. "The Harpers, they're the only ones with access to that back road, and their delivery truck is the same one that left those tire marks by the creek. They're trying to ruin us." Maggie felt her heart thump painfully in her chest. "If this is true, we can't just accuse them without proof. We need to catch them in the act." Grace nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we set a trap. We'll be ready this time." That night, Grace organized the ranch hands, laying out the plan in a voice that brooked no argument. She stationed them in pairs along the property line, walkie-talkies in hand, everyone alert for the slightest sign of trouble. Maggie watched with pride as her granddaughter, once so timid, now so fearless, took charge of the ranch she'd almost given up on. As the hours crawled by, the sky thickened with clouds, lightning flickering on the horizon. The air was tense, electric. Grace took her post near Duke's paddock, a flashlight in one hand and the other resting gently on the horse's neck. "We're in this together, old boy," she murmured. "You've been brave for me. Now it's my turn." Midnight passed in anxious silence. Then a rustle, a snap of twigs near the north fence. Grace stiffened, signaling to Tomas, who crept quietly through the brush. Two shadowy figures moved at the edge of the property, their voices hushed, one carrying a can of something, likely poison. Grace's heart pounded as she clicked on her flashlight, the beam catching their faces. "Stop! You're trespassing on Whitaker land!" For a heartbeat, everything hung suspended. Then, in a flurry of movement, the intruders bolted, right into the waiting arms of the ranch hands. There was a scuffle, a flurry of shouted curses, and then Tomas had them pinned, flashlight illuminating their faces. One was a Harper ranch hand, the other a delivery driver. Maggie hurried to Grace's side, relief flooding her features. "You did it, honey. You saved the ranch." But Grace shook her head, breathing hard, tears shining in her eyes. "No, we did it, all of us, and I'm not afraid anymore." As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, the Whitaker women stood side by side with their people, with Duke, survivors, united, ready to face whatever came next. And somewhere in the early morning light, the old wounds felt just a little less sharp, the burdens a little lighter, and hope, stubborn, wild, and beautiful, took root once again at Willow Ranch. By the time the dust settled on the failed sabotage, the Whitaker women had more than just a broken fence to worry about. The men they'd caught, one a Harper hand, the other the same delivery driver who'd left tracks by the creek, had been hauled away by the sheriff, but the rumor mill in town was just kicking into high gear. Grace watched the deputy's truck disappear down the county road, her heart a thundering drum. She'd never felt so proud or so exposed. Willow Ranch was no longer a quiet target. That afternoon, as thunderclouds gathered low over the hills, Maggie got a call from the sheriff. "Elizabeth Harper's on her way over," he said, voice gruff. "She wants to settle this face to face." Maggie met Grace's questioning glance with a grim nod. "Guess it's time to stop running." Elizabeth Harper arrived before sunset, her sedan crunching gravel at the ranch gate. She stepped out in her neat green coat, silver hair twisted in a knot, her face as calm and sharp as a hawk. With her was her son, Marcus, now running the Harper Hill Ranch, a broad-shouldered man with deep lines around his eyes and suspicion etched in every movement. "We need to talk," Elizabeth said, not bothering with pleasantries. They gathered around the kitchen table, the air thick with old resentments and unsaid things. Marcus glared at the floor while his mother did the talking. "You Whitaker set a trap for my men. You accused us of sabotage, of poisoning, vandalism." "Your men trespassed. They tried to ruin us," Maggie cut in, steady and cold. "I have proof. The sheriff does too." Marcus slammed a fist on the table. "You always thought you were better than us. After what happened to Tom, after you stole Duke." Grace bristled, voice trembling but strong. "We didn't steal anyone. My grandma bought Duke fair and square, after you all left him to die." Elizabeth raised a hand, silencing her son. "This feud has gone on long enough. There's been too much loss on both sides. Marcus, you're done with this foolishness." Marcus turned red, but he sat back, sullen. Maggie leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Elizabeth's. "You have to take responsibility. Your people tried to destroy what's left of my family, and all because of a horse and an accident that broke all of us." Elizabeth's voice cracked, just for a second. "I'm sorry for what Jack did, for what happened to Tom, but I won't let my family's shame turn into hate. We can fix this if we face the truth, publicly." It was settled then. Both families would confront the feud and the truth at the upcoming county fair, where the whole community would see what kind of people stood behind each ranch. The news spread like wildfire. By the morning of the fair, the town was buzzing. Old friends and enemies, curious onlookers, folks from miles around crowded the fairgrounds. The Harpers and Whitakers, families whose stories were stitched into the fabric of the valley, were set for a public reckoning. Maggie and Grace arrived early, Duke trailing behind them in his halter, his coat brushed to a shine. There were whispers, pointing fingers, more than a few harsh words, but Grace walked with her chin up, her hand steady on Duke's neck. As they reached the main arena, Elizabeth Harper and Marcus stood waiting, flanked by their own supporters. The county commissioner took the mic, his voice echoing across the fairgrounds. "We're here today not just for the horse show, but for something bigger. This valley's been divided too long by suspicion, gossip, and old grudges. It's time for the truth to come out, and for this community to choose what kind of future it wants." The air buzzed with tension. Maggie stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. The sabotage at Willow Ranch came from Harper Hill. We have the proof. But that's not why we're here. We're here to say enough is enough. My husband's death was a tragedy, one that broke both our families. Blaming Duke, blaming each other, it's only brought more pain. Elizabeth nodded, tears in her eyes. My son Jack never forgave himself. I lost him to grief and guilt. I lost Duke, too, because I couldn't bear to look at what he reminded me of. But Grace and Maggie, they gave him a second chance. Maybe it's time for us all to do the same. Marcus stepped up, face flushed, his voice strained. I'm sorry. I thought I was protecting my family's honor, but all I did was make things worse. We were wrong. There was a hush, the kind that runs deep in the bones. Then, with the whole crowd watching, the commissioner nodded. Let's let the horses speak for us today. Whitaker's Duke and Harper's Best, head-to-head in the working horse contest. The arena filled with energy. Grace mounted Duke, nerves tight but spirit blazing. Across from her, a Harper Hill rider mounted their own champion. The contest was a test of skill and partnership, herding, agility, teamwork. The whistle blew. Duke surged forward, Grace guiding him with a gentle hand and quiet words. Every move was seamless, turns sharp, stops clean. Duke responding to Grace's cues as if they shared one mind. The crowd leaned in, breath held, as Duke chased down a runaway calf, spun on a dime, and brought it home with effortless grace. On the final run, the Harper horse faltered, spooked by a sudden shout from the stands. Grace and Duke finished strong, the crowd erupting in applause. For a moment, all the pain and bitterness dissolved in that bright Wyoming sunshine. After the dust settled, Maggie and Grace were swarmed with neighbors, some apologizing, some congratulating, some just wanting to shake their hands. The commissioner took the mic once more. Today, we saw what can happen when we stop blaming, start healing. This valley needs both families. And maybe, just maybe, it needs more horses like Duke, brave enough to keep going no matter what. The truth about Duke's past and the Whitaker family's innocence was no longer a secret. The story was out. The wounds weren't healed yet, but for the first time, Maggie and Grace could see a way forward, a future not built on bitterness, but on courage and the strength to forgive. The news of what happened at the county fair swept through the valley like a fresh spring wind, clearing the last stubborn shadows of suspicion and bitterness. By the time Maggie and Grace led Duke out of the arena, heads held high, the Whitaker name sounded different on people's lips. Where there once was gossip and scorn, now there was admiration and, just as importantly, respect. For a long while, Maggie just stood outside the fairground arena, hand on Duke's withers, soaking in the moment. Grace was surrounded by friends she never thought she'd have again. Schoolmates, neighbors, even old Mrs. Garvey, who pressed a paper bag of cookies into her arms and whispered, "I always knew you Whitaker girls were made of stronger stuff than folks gave you credit for." That evening, the commissioner himself approached Maggie and Grace, the brim of his hat low against the sunset. "We'd be honored if you'd lead the roundup parade this year," he said, nodding at Duke, who tossed his head as if he understood every word. "Your horse is a hero now, and so are you." Grace's eyes shone. Maggie, for a moment, had no words. Finally, she managed a smile. "Thank you. I think Duke would be proud to show the town what second chances look like." The days that followed were filled with a new energy at Willow Ranch. Neighbors came by, not to offer condolences or warnings, but to help. The Garveys brought lumber and tools. Tomas's cousins patched up the barn roof, their laughter filling the air. Even Marcus Harper stopped by, awkward but sincere. "We want to help you rebuild," he said, not quite meeting Maggie's eyes. I know an apology doesn't fix everything, but I hope it's a start." Maggie, surprised but grateful, shook his hand. "It's a good start, Marcus. Thank you." Grace, for her part, seemed transformed. She moved through the ranch with confidence, her shoulders back, her voice sure. She took charge of repairs, organized the help, and even started planning for a community open house. A chance for neighbors, old friends, and strangers alike to see Willow Ranch as it truly was, a place of hope, not heartbreak. One afternoon, while Maggie repaired the old sign by the front gate, Grace came running from the barn, her cheeks flushed. "Grandma, the school called. They want me to give a talk about what happened with Duke, about second chances and forgiveness." Maggie paused, watching her granddaughter's excitement. "I'm proud of you, Grace, not just for what you did, but for the person you're becoming." Grace grinned, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think I'm proud of me, too." The day of the Roundup parade dawned bright and clear. The whole town gathered along Main Street, children waving flags, ranchers in their best boots, even the mayor standing on the courthouse steps. At the head of the parade rode Maggie, Grace, and Duke, now glossy, his mane braided with blue ribbons. The applause followed them all the way down the street. Strangers waved, and old friends called out, "Go Duke! Go Grace! Go Maggie!" As they reached the town square, the commissioner invited Maggie to say a few words. She hesitated, her hands trembling just a little, but Grace squeezed her arm, steadying her. Maggie spoke, her voice carrying clear in the summer air. "When I bought Duke, folks called me a fool. When trouble came, there were days I thought maybe they were right. But this horse and this family taught me that sometimes what looks broken is only waiting for a chance to heal. We all make mistakes. We all lose our way. But when we choose kindness, when we choose to stand by each other, we can build something stronger than what we lost." The crowd was silent for a moment, then erupted in cheers. Even Elizabeth Harper was there, wiping a tear from her cheek. That evening, as dusk settled over Willow Ranch, Maggie and Grace sat together on the porch, watching fireflies blink over the pasture. The ranch was alive with new sounds: laughter from the kitchen, children playing in the yard, neighbors sharing stories by the barn. "I got a letter today," Grace said, breaking the comfortable silence. "It's from a rescue group. They want to partner with us, help us take in more horses like Duke, maybe even start an outreach for kids who need a second chance." Maggie felt her heart swell, a gentle ache that was all pride and no pain. "I think your granddad would be proud of that. I know I am." Duke wandered by the fence, his ears flicking at the sound of their voices. Grace called to him, and he came, nuzzling her shoulder with the easy trust that had taken months to earn. The next day, Maggie was surprised to find a group of local kids at the gate, holding handmade signs. "Thank you, Duke. Willow Ranch equals hope. Second chances live here." Grace led them on a tour, telling Duke's story, talking about forgiveness, resilience, and the courage it took to start again. As she spoke, Maggie watched her granddaughter, so strong, so sure, sharing the lessons their family had learned in the hardest possible way. Willow Ranch, once a symbol of sorrow, had become a place of new beginnings. The old wounds were healing, the fences mended, and the land alive again with laughter and hope. Maggie knew that scars would always remain, but now, every time she looked at Duke or heard Grace's laughter echo across the fields, she was reminded redemption is always possible, especially when a community chooses to come together. And as the stars winked on above the Wyoming hills, Maggie closed her eyes, breathed deep, and knew that Willow Ranch was finally, blessedly home. Summer deepened, casting warm, golden light across Willow Ranch. The air buzzed with the easy hum of bees and the low, satisfied sounds of cattle grazing. Life no longer felt like a struggle for survival, but something to savor, a patchwork of ordinary miracles, stitched together by forgiveness and courage. Maggie found herself smiling more, her heart lighter as each day passed. Grace, too, carried herself with a quiet confidence, her laughter ringing clear and true across the fields. It was in this season of peace that Maggie received an invitation to speak at the town hall meeting, a gathering meant to address not just Willow Ranch's past struggles, but the broader issues that had shaped their tight-knit Wyoming community. The invitation felt different from all the others she received over the years. There was respect in the way her name was written, and hope in the way her neighbors spoke to her at the store. Maggie knew she couldn't do it alone. She sat with Grace on the porch one evening, dusk falling soft around them, Duke grazing nearby. "They want to hear our story, Grace. Not just mine. Yours, too, and Duke's. This is bigger than us now." Grace nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Maybe if we tell the truth, it'll help somebody else. I want to try." The night of the meeting, the town hall was full to bursting. Farmers, ranchers, teachers, kids, people of all ages crammed onto the benches, eager to listen. Maggie stood first, her hand steady at the podium. The room grew quiet as she spoke. "When my husband died, I thought I had to be strong for everyone. I closed myself off, tried to carry it all alone. I lost sight of what this place really meant and who it was meant for. When I brought home Duke, folks laughed, but that old horse saved us in more ways than I can count. He gave me something to fight for when I was ready to give up. He brought my granddaughter back to me. He made me face the truth, even when it hurt." She paused, her eyes finding Grace in the front row. "I learned that healing takes honesty. It takes admitting your pain and asking for help, and forgiving the ones who let you down, even when that person is yourself." Grace stood next. She was nervous at first, her voice trembling, but she pushed through, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I was angry for a long time. I blamed Duke, I blamed Grandma, I blamed myself for things I couldn't control. But Duke didn't just save me in that stampede. He helped me learn how to trust again, how to be brave even when you're scared." She turned, addressing the crowd directly. "We all mess up. We all get hurt. But you can't heal by hiding. You have to talk, to forgive, to let other people in. I learned that you can find strength in being vulnerable, and that sometimes the things you think are broken just need a chance to show their worth." There were tears in more than a few eyes. People shifted on the benches, moved by the honesty and rawness of the Whitaker women's story. Maggie could feel the energy change, the old, hard lines of judgment and suspicion blurring into something softer, more understanding. After the meeting, folks lingered to talk. Mrs. Garvey pulled Maggie aside, pressing her hands in a warm grip. "You gave us all permission to feel again, Maggie. For too long, we've been afraid to admit when we need help. Maybe now things will be different." A local teacher approached Grace. "I want my students to meet Duke, to hear your story. There are kids here who feel just as lost as you did. Maybe they'll see there's a way forward." As summer stretched on, the town took these lessons to heart. The county council set up new outreach programs for at-risk youth, modeled after what Willow Ranch was starting with the rescue horses. The animal shelter began working with ranches to find homes for old or abandoned horses, inspired by Duke's story. Even the oldest, grumpiest ranchers began showing up at meetings, willing to talk about their struggles, something unthinkable just a few months earlier. One afternoon, Maggie received a letter from the county. They wanted to honor Duke with a plaque in the town square. In gratitude for the courage, hope, and second chances inspired by Duke and Willow Ranch. The ceremony was small but powerful. Maggie stood with Grace and Duke under the bright Wyoming sun, watching neighbors and friends gather to read the inscription, touch the horse's neck, and remember the lessons they'd learned. Later, as the crowd thinned, Maggie found herself surrounded by children. "Is Duke really a hero?" one little boy asked, his face smeared with ice cream. Maggie knelt down, smiling. "He's a hero to us. But he's also proof that sometimes being brave just means not giving up, even when everyone else thinks you're finished." As the days passed, Willow Ranch became a place where second chances weren't just talked about, they were lived. Grace helped run the rescue program, pairing scared kids with gentle horses. She listened to their fears, shared her own, and watched as trust bloomed where once there had only been pain. Maggie started writing a memoir at Grace's urging. "You have to tell people what you learned, Grandma. It matters." And all the while, Duke roamed the pastures, no longer overlooked or ridiculed, but beloved, a living reminder of how even the most battered spirits can heal, and how true worth is often hidden beneath the scars. At night, as Maggie sat on the porch with Grace, they watched the stars wheel overhead and listened to the quiet sounds of life on the ranch. In those moments, Maggie knew that the real legacy of Willow Ranch, and of Duke, wasn't just survival. It was the courage to change, the wisdom to forgive, and the promise of hope for anyone willing to open their heart. Years slipped by, steady as the Wyoming wind, and time left its gentle marks on Willow Ranch. The fences were strong now, patched and painted, wildflowers creeping up the posts every spring. Children's laughter echoed across the fields where once only grief had settled. And at the heart of it all, Duke grazed quietly under the big cottonwood by the creek. His face a little grayer, his step slower, but his spirit unchanged, a living testament to the power of second chances. Maggie grew older, too, her hair silvering, her movements slower but still purposeful. She spent more time in the sunny kitchen, journals and letters spread across the table, memories tumbling from her pen. She wrote about the ranch, about Tom and Grace, about the trials and small miracles that shaped them all. And always she wrote about Duke, the horse nobody wanted, who became the heart of everything. At night, as Maggie sat on the porch with Grace, they watched the stars wheel overhead and listened to the quiet sounds of life on the ranch. In those moments, Maggie knew that the real legacy of Willow Ranch, and of Duke, wasn't just survival. It was the courage to change, the wisdom to forgive, and the promise of hope for anyone willing to open their heart. Years slipped by, steady as the Wyoming wind, and time left its gentle marks on Willow Ranch. The fences were strong now, patched and painted, wildflowers creeping up the posts every spring. Children's laughter echoed across the fields where once only grief had settled. And at the heart of it all, Duke grazed quietly under the big cottonwood by the creek. His face a little grayer, his step slower, but his spirit unchanged, a living testament to the power of second chances. Maggie grew older too, her hair silvering, her movements slower but still purposeful. She spent more time in the sunny kitchen, journals and letters spread across the table, memories tumbling from her pen. She wrote about the ranch, about Tom and Grace, about the trials and small miracles that shaped them all. And always she wrote about Duke, the horse nobody wanted, who became the heart of everything. Grace changed too. She blossomed into a strong, steady woman, her confidence rooted deep in the land and the lessons of her past. She took over more of the ranch each year, running new programs for kids from hard places, some who had lost parents, some who had lost their way. She gave them chores and purpose and quiet afternoons with gentle horses, teaching them, it's okay to start over. The world is full of second chances if you're brave enough to take them. The outreach grew, drawing in families from neighboring towns. Local teachers brought their classes to Willow Ranch to hear Grace's story and brush Duke's coat. Volunteers came every summer, learning the rhythms of ranch life and the wisdom in caring for creatures who'd been forgotten. Through it all, Duke remained a beloved presence. His old stall was decorated with thank-you notes and hand-painted signs, "You're a hero, Duke," made by the children he helped. Even as his back swayed with age and his eyes clouded a bit, he still greeted each new arrival with a gentle nuzzle, as if reminding them that everyone deserves kindness, no matter how rough their journey. Maggie sometimes watched from the porch, a blanket over her knees, as Grace led tours through the barn or taught a nervous child to hold a brush steady. She felt a warmth that was part pride, part peace. There were still hard days, the loss of old friends, the challenges of drought or storms. But the fear and bitterness that once haunted Willow Ranch were long gone, replaced by something enduring and bright. The memoir Maggie wrote, The Worth of the Overlooked, was published by a small local press. At first, she was embarrassed by the attention, but as letters poured in from strangers who found hope in her words, Maggie understood the importance of sharing the story. "We all have scars," she wrote. "Some of us wear them where everyone can see, and some keep them hidden. But if we let them, those scars can bring us together. They can teach us about forgiveness, about courage, about the quiet worth of the overlooked." Her book was read at the school, discussed at the town library, even featured on the local radio. People started to see the value in old animals, in lonely neighbors, in the quiet acts of care that could change a life. The county's animal shelter partnered with Willow Ranch to create a sanctuary for retired horses, and more than one old gelding found new purpose in the laughter of children learning to ride. Grace was tireless, always dreaming up new ways to give back. She launched a summer camp for at-risk youth, helped start a food pantry on the ranch, and hosted support circles for grieving families. She sometimes paused at sunset by the pasture, watching Duke nose through the clover, and remembered how close she'd come to giving up on herself. One evening, Grace found Maggie by the kitchen window, watching lightning bugs swirl over the fields. "Do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" Grace asked softly. Maggie smiled, her face creased with wisdom. "No, not anymore. We lost a lot, it's true, but we found so much more. We found each other again, we found forgiveness, and we learned that real worth isn't measured by what's easy or perfect. It's measured by what you do with what you're given, even if what you're given is broken." Duke's last years were peaceful, filled with gentle rides and quiet afternoons spent sunning himself while children told him their secrets. When his time came, he passed under the cottonwood he loved, with Maggie and Grace by his side, whispering words of gratitude and goodbye. The town held a memorial for him, neighbors, kids, ranchers, even rivals, standing together to celebrate a horse whose story had healed so many. A small statue was placed by the ranch gate, cast in bronze by a local artist. The plaque beneath it read, "Sometimes the most broken among us carry the greatest worth. At Willow Ranch, no life is wasted, and every scar tells a story of hope." Years later, Willow Ranch continued to thrive, not just as a business, but as a sanctuary. People came from far and wide seeking comfort, guidance, or just a taste of peace. They left with muddy boots, full hearts, and the knowledge that even the deepest wounds can heal. Grace, now the heart of the ranch, stood where her grandmother once did, welcoming lost souls, tending to animals no one else would take, and teaching every visitor the lessons Duke had taught her, that kindness is a strength, that forgiveness is a gift, that hope is never wasted, no matter how late it arrives. And Maggie, older and content, found herself surrounded by family, friends, and the quiet assurance that nothing given in love is ever lost. In her last chapter, she wrote, "When we are brave enough to face the truth, gentle enough to forgive, and wise enough to see worth in what's overlooked, we become more than survivors. We become a family. And that is the real legacy of Willow Ranch." The sun set soft over the fields, the cottonwood leaves whispering in the breeze, and the spirit of Duke running forever through the tall Wyoming grass, a legacy of hope, honesty, and kindness, carried on by all those willing to believe in second chances.